right, I'm excited. The final lap. I'm I think the final presenter. So should be great. I knew it was the final presentation, so I decided to open up with a joke, which can be dangerous. It's not a political joke, don't worry. It's actually a renewals joke. In fact, it's the nerdiest renewals joke ever told. So out of all the renewals jokes you've heard in your life, this is the nerdiest renewals joke ever heard. You guys ready? Ready for the renewals joke? Ready? Everyone ready? Okay, cool. Let me put it up here. Oh wait, that's not the joke. Anyone know what that is? Anyone know what that is? Science geeks in the audience? Want to raise your hand? So this is the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which if you remember physics class, it's actually one of the most important theories in all of science. And basically the Heisenberg uncertainty principle says, if you're going to go to the next slide, that at any given point in our universe, for any object, we can either know where it is or where it's going, but not both. And this is a mind bender, right? Because in real life, you think you know where things are and where they're going. But it turns out when you go deep, deep, deep at the quantum level, you can either know where something is or where it's going at any given time. So how does this translate to renewals? Well, it translates because I am the creator of the Mehta-Heisenberg uncertainty principle for renewals, which I'm going to roll out to you today. The Mehta-Heisenberg uncertainty principle for renewals basically uses the same concept that you can know something and not something else, but you can't know both of them. And it says basically at Summit or any other gathering of renewals professionals, you can either know somebody's renewal rate or you can ask them how they calculate it, but you can't know both at the same time. And that's the Mehta-Heisenberg uncertainty renewals principle. So thank you very much. In case you haven't figured it out yet, I'm a big old nerd. I grew up a nerd. I still am a nerd. I love it. And I love technology. I love business. One of the proof points of me being a nerd when I was a kid was I was always the kid who at any given point had more computers in my possession than I had friends. Many, many more computers than friends at any given point. And the reason I had that was really all about my upbringing, my dad. So my dad, as I'll talk about, was a high-tech executive. This is me with my dad. As you can see, I had a unique fashion sense even back then. I don't know what was in the briefcase at 8 years old, but I grew up around technology. And my dad worked at a company called Digital Equipment, which probably some people in the room here know. Lots of conferences I go to and get blank stares. Digital Equipment is the kind of company that's so old that the only photo on Google Images is black and white. But Digital Equipment was a big computer company in the 70s. He was actually a reasonably senior executive there. And then he went to run a bunch of software companies. He actually ran some value-added resellers. And so I was around technology my whole childhood. That's why I had so many computers. And he always told me when I was growing up, actually literally, I think when I was 8 years old, I remember sitting with him and he would say, okay, when you go into business, it wasn't if, it when you go into business, you either have to be the person that's building the product, you have to be that engineer that's building the product, or you want to be the person that's selling the product. And in my dad's words, everything else is overhead. And so obviously it's funny what I do now because it's so antithetical to that. And he claims this wasn't true and he never said that, but he really did. And and now the world's changed so much. Obviously with customer success, we'll talk a lot more about it. My story was I worked at Veritas and Symantec, great companies. I was originally the person building stuff and product manager, kind of building products. Then I ran a business unit, was selling stuff. And in the company at that time, it really was about building and selling, building and selling. Then I went to run my first SaaS business. Brian talked about his company, Live Office. It was the first business where every month, every year, our customers voted on our entire revenue. And we had to re-earn that revenue every year. And if you have a SaaS business or subscription business, and if you've gone from a perpetual to subscription world, it's just such a stark contrast. And you realize that your customers actually never loved you as much as you thought they did. They were just stuck with you. And now in this new world, they really have choices. And so in running my last company, I got really passionate about what we now talk about as customer success. I didn't know anything about it because honestly, I was just a product management salesperson, that kind of thing. But I just learned on the job about what I'm going to talk a lot about today, which is customer success. After selling that company, I got introduced to Gainsight and just fell in love with the whole industry that we're talking about here. So just in case, I think most people understand the concept, but when I try to explain it to people in business terms, putting aside the bigger purpose of making our customers successful, from a revenue perspective, we really think that people need to think about the revenue funnel differently at a fundamental level. You got sales and support in the traditional product model, and now you've got the land, adopt, expand, renew motion, right, that we all know about. And we really think customer success is an enabler, an accelerant to drive adoption, expansion, renewal, right? And if you can do customer success right early in the process, a lot of those outcomes come later in the process. And so that's what we're very passionate about at Gainsight. As a company, we basically are trying to do 3 things to drive this movement. I'm not going to talk much about Gainsight, just one slide on who we are, and then we'll talk about some best practices we've seen. So we build a software product that's a kind of ServiceSource integrated solution to help manage the process of customer success, to basically get your team to proactively work off of data so that they're driving towards client outcomes. But much more important than just software, we actually realize that there's a big organizational transition that's happening in companies. We've talked a lot about it the last couple days. And software doesn't change organizations. And so we've done a lot of stuff to partner with great organizations like ServiceSource and others to run events. We actually wrote a book on customer success that you all have a copy of. And then we do a big conference. I invite you all to join. ServiceSource will be there as well, hopefully next May. It's once a year in Oakland, California, called Pulse. I'll talk more about that in a second. We do lots of other events, bringing people together to talk about customer success. And then we work with, for our software, work with lots of large B2B companies in technology, industrial devices, healthcare, lots of other areas. And in our outcomes, we're trying to drive our greater retention for our clients and more expansion. Now, Pulse is interesting, our conference, because it's almost just a litmus test for the interest in a new way of thinking about relationships with customers. We started this event 4 years ago. Anthony, my marketing guy there in the corner, and I were sitting in a little Regis office, and we're like 10 people in the company, and we said we should throw an event on customer success. And nobody knew what customer success was, but we thought we'd throw a little thing in San Francisco, and we thought we'd get 50 people there, and 300 people showed up. And then this most recent May in Oakland, we had 3,200 people come to this event talking about customer success in their companies, whether they're SaaS companies, software companies, cloud companies, hardware, industrial devices, professional services. Like I saw like a company that made machine tools coming to the conference, hopefully not accidentally, that was actually wanting to learn about customer success. So pretty interesting how big of a trend it is. Now, how many of you, raise your hands if you have a customer success team in your company, somebody called customer success? All right, great. And then now raise your hands again if you think you've totally figured it out, customer success. All right, anyone raise their, no hands, okay, because otherwise you have to come up on stage and do the presentation. So the topic of this presentation is really how do you bridge that gap and how do you operationalize this concept? Because actually, to some extent, the high level stuff is both obvious and nice and attractive, but the question is how do you make it real in your company? And so I wanted to talk about some best practices in operationalizing customer success. Now, if I had done this presentation a couple years ago, I would have just used one of our frameworks. And I'll briefly walk through the framework. The framework says, okay, there's 5 principles of customer success in operationalization. At the top, basically getting much more prescriptive about your customer lifecycle post-sale. So a lot of companies have very detailed stages for what they do from a sales and marketing standpoint, moving customers through the funnel. If I go to your website, you'll figure out my email address, whether you give it to me or not. Will I give it to you or not? You'll retarget me on the web. You'll send me emails. You'll nurture me. But then once I buy, are you taking me through a journey or am I on my own, right? And that's the concept of driving operational customer lifecycle. Number 2, managing customer risk proactively. And that's basically looking at all these signals to figure out customers that might be at risk that you didn't know about. We'll talk more about that. Number 3, a big area emerging is showing customers the value they're receiving. Because one of the challenges nowadays is people buy so much stuff. It's so easy to buy that you lose sight of what you're getting. And this shows up when you're trying to do a renewal and the procurement person says, yeah, we're not really using it. And actually, in reality, they actually are using it, but they don't really even know. Number 4, tying that into the sales motion, like a number of presenters talked about, to drive expansion, but also to drive advocacy, which is something people don't talk about enough. What causes people to buy your products in the first place? It's really that latent advocacy that's out there. Customer success is all about that. And then number 5, actually the biggest lever is making your company better based on all this data. A few people talked about that, the idea that your customer success motion becomes a voice of the customer. How do you learn? I love the presentation from Google, learning the use cases of customers and then sharing those with engineering, things like that. So a couple years ago, this would have been my presentation because it's very theoretical. And then maybe about a year ago, I would have said, no, we need to make it more specific and actually make it about a few best practices. But then like over the last 3.5 years, I love customers. I've seen so many of them. I average about 10 to 15 clients a week and 50 weeks a year. It's 1,750 probably mathematically people I've talked to about customer success. Eventually you get cynical. You're like, I don't know any best practices anymore, but I do know some of the worst practices. So what we're going to talk about today is the actual things to avoid. Now, Anthony, my marketing guy, saw the worst practices thing, so it's not very attractive. So this is the 7 deadly sins of enterprise customer success. So that's what we're going to try to talk about today, is what are practical potholes people stumble into, pitfalls they fall into, that we can all avoid by learning from each other. And that's kind of the focus here. So diving in. So deadly sin number 1 is the idea of a one-size-fits-all approach to customer success. So given what I do, I get lots of questions about customer success. And CEO come to me and say something like, should customer success report into sales or services? Should they have comp for renewals? What type of CSM should I hire? And of course, the answer is always yes, both, and, right? Because the reality is they've got lots of different businesses, lots of different segments, and customer success isn't one thing. Like actually, if we went around the room and said, what are you doing for customer success? We're going to hear lots of different things. So the first mistake people make is thinking they can distill it down into one best practice. Honestly, it's really like an umbrella of stuff. Lots of different things that all kind of get grouped together. And the way we think about it in the company is you can go back to your customer pyramid that all of us have, and we really like to think of 3 canonical approaches to customer success. So at the top is kind of your high-touch customer success approach, which frankly, most of us, whether we know it or not, kind of do this, right? This is the one where you rally with your cell phones and your United Airlines miles, and you go see customers, and you make sure you're all on the same page, and you drive value for them. And by the way, I love the fact that this is the most photographed slide in our presentation. It's just a triangle, so, but it still gets photographed a lot. So the high-touch approach to customer success, we see people innovating in trying to get more coordinated, right? So what they're doing is saying, okay, we need to make sure we don't stumble across each other. There's not a shortage of people talking to the customer. In a way, there's too many in some cases, right? How do we get coordinated across that support case that they just had, the outage they had in one data center, the PS project that's running over, the expansion we're trying to do here? How do you get coordinated? That's like what high-touch customer success is all about. It's not about automation, it's about coordination. Now, conversely, in the middle, what we think of as mid-touch customer success is all of those customers that think they should be high-touch. So the ones that they don't spend enough money with you to be your biggest accounts, but they think they should be your biggest accounts. And you need to provide that high-touch-like experience, but in a way where it's almost just in time, because you couldn't afford to have that much coverage on them. And that ends up being, we think, a lot of trigger-driven mechanisms. We'll talk more about that based on data. So, how do you get to them at the right time so things haven't totally blown up, but you're not calling them every day, right? And it's not the same coverage. And then the bottom, something that's very popular now in customer success, is the idea of tech touch customer success, where we don't call it low touch, because low touch makes it sound bad. The question is, how do you use technology to create a touch that's both effective but also sustainable, right? Because when we talk to companies that say, oh, I'm a CSM, I ask somebody, I'm a CSM, and then I say, how many accounts do you have? They say 2,000 accounts. And I'm like, I don't think you're a customer success manager. I don't know what you are, but I don't think, if you can't even name all your customers, I don't think you could be a named account manager, right? Like there's something different that you're doing. You got to think of it differently, right? More of a marketing-like approach. Now, in this slide, one of the other important things at the bottom, probably the hottest thing in customer success now is for anyone that's been around for a while, a big chunk of your revenue might be coming in the channel. How does this translate to the channel? And so this is probably the most common conversation we have with folks now. I don't think anyone has figured it out yet, but they're trying to figure out what's the expectation of a channel partner in terms of driving the customer lifecycle. They're asking companies like Gainsight to provide tools for that. They want the channel to have visibility into adoption, usage data, things like that. So if you looked at this pyramid and said, what's your customer success strategy? It should be, what's your strategies? What are the different strategies? How do they apply to different parts of your business? Don't try to distill it down into one thing, because that's kind of doomed to fail. So that's the first thing that's a deadly sin of customer success. The second one is something that actually I hear about a lot. Actually, it's kind of a common story I'll hear from customers is, we're working our customer success strategy. We're about to get started on it. We're just trying to get all our data cleaned up. And I'm like, okay, we'll talk to you in 2025, the year 2025, when we're all robots and everything's totally automated, because you're never going to get your data totally cleaned up, right? And I think we all know that. It's a constant battle. And so I think a lot of companies have this misunderstanding of data. They expect that there's some world where their data is going to be totally perfect and everything's going to be completely automated. And in reality, at least my experience, it's the companies that commit to data like you commit to the gym where you're just never going to be totally in shape, but you just keep trying, right? And so I think with data, you need an ongoing commitment to it. You need to constantly be thinking about it. You can't think of it as a project that has a start date and an end date. Now, I understand why people think of data as this holy grail. Actually, the quote that kind of I think about with data is actually this Tolstoy quote. I don't know if you've read Anna Karenina, but it's basically the famous quote says, happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. And if you change families to customers, the basic idea is that we think that if we have data, we can figure out what's wrong with this customer, right? And that's actually what's very appealing, right? That's, when you really think about it, you're looking for all these signals, like if you think of like a breadcrumb trail in Hansel and Gretel, all these signals that tell us this customer's gone off track. What I would tell you is a lot of companies have a lot more signals than they give themselves credit to, right? They're actually waiting for the holy grail of perfection. But actually, as Chris talked about earlier, they've got all this stuff right now. We did this survey a little bit of time ago and basically asked our customers, what are you using to measure, basically customer health and things like that. And of course, the top thing if you have an online business or you have telemetry in your product would be product usage. I think we all know that that's something we'd like to do. But there's all these other things people have been looking at and trying to instrument to get a better handle on customer health. Things like, for example, executive relationship. Amazingly, honestly, it's, in my opinion, more important in a lot of companies than the actual usage of the product. But a lot of companies haven't systematized how they track that. Support activity, which I think a number of people here understand, but the activity or the non-activity in support, taking action on customer surveys, looking at the admin that changed for your product. There's all these signals that you've got. If you've got a marketing automation system, you've got a support system, all this data. And when we look at it, we go into a client and say, hey, okay, what do you want to track? What's on your scorecard for what you want to measure for your customer health? And we usually come up with some vision for what that is. And it turns out a lot of the data that they want to look at is there today. So for example, they want to measure the health of their sponsor relationship. And one of the things you can look at is on social networks, did that person leave the job or not, right? So if they leave the job, obviously that's a big red flag. Amazing how many companies don't automatically look for that. Looking at customer referenceability as a signal, people that stop taking references, declined references. Looking at the time to value for a customer and the survey most of you probably do after an implementation as a signal for the health of that customer. 6 months later, they may still remember that time to value took a long time and that affects your renewal. By the way, you find out about that at the renewal. They say, well, we didn't really go live for 6 months and you find out very late, right? The fact that they're not paying their bills on time, if you've got a recurring billing model, obviously, generally speaking, when companies don't pay their bills on time, they either have a problem themselves or they have a problem with you, one of the two, right? And so how do you look at that more systematically? A lot of companies have implemented voice of the customer systems to measure customer health, customer feedback, kind of looking at that as a source of understanding risk in an account. Obviously looking at the support system, which is a treasure trove of data, not just looking at how many tickets they've filed, but if they stopped opening tickets, there's probably good tickets and bad tickets in your business, right? Good tickets are how do I do more with the product, and bad tickets are this thing keeps failing, right? So there's a lot of ways to look at that. Looking at your professional services automation system and projects that are going overdue, and then obviously looking at telemetry in your product if you have that, right? And there's more, right? You've got an online community, you've got a marketing automation system. There's so much data that companies have. Now, often what they do is they zoom in on that telemetry, right? They zoom in on telemetry. What I hear a lot from non-SaaS companies is they say, I wish I was a SaaS business because I would know everything about my customers through the telemetry. I can tell you as a SaaS company that works with hundreds of other SaaS companies, most of us don't look at the telemetry as the main source of data about customer health. Is that surprising? Because just knowing that they're using your product, if they're not using it, it's very bad, right? But just because they're using it doesn't mean they're going to stay with you. There's so many other factors that go into whether they're going to stay with you or not. And so telemetry is just one piece of data. So the second kind of idea is don't get too lost in waiting for perfect data. It's something that I think if you wait, you'll really wait forever. Third idea. A lot of companies we talk to get very enamored with the idea of predictive analytics, right? In fact, they talk to me, they say, Gainsight, you're predictive analytics. I'm like, no, not really. We're not really predictive analytics. I don't think you know what that means. I don't think I know what that means, right? Predictive analytics is a term that a lot of people use, but the reality is that artificial intelligence, machine learning is still at the very early stages of kind of what we can do with it. And frankly, a lot of the operationalization of customer success is very basic rules. So this is something that we'll talk more about, but don't get too enamored in what the machine can do. Think about what your team can do. And so just a little bit of detail on this. One challenge with predictive analytics in customer success and retention is a sample size problem. So I don't know how much you know about predictive analytics, but the basic idea is you train the system based on data, right? You say, okay, here's all the things that went well, things that didn't, right? So that works really well when you have a lot of signal. Facebook newsfeed, right? Well, I don't know how well the newsfeed works, but anymore, lost faith in it. But Facebook newsfeed, right? Theoretically, it tells you what you should be reading and what you don't read based on what you like and what you don't. They get billions and billions of signals every day, so that works well. Your marketing automation works pretty well because tons of people come to your website, right? Lots of visitors to your website. But if you go down the funnel and look at a typical business, and if you kind of go all the way down to people that churn, you don't have a lot of signal, right? You don't have a lot of people that don't renew. Maybe in a big business, you have a lot of people that don't renew, but even then, if you slice it by geo and by segment and by channel, you end up saying, okay, I've got 10 people upon which to make a prediction. So one thing I'm here to tell you is actually customer success is not about predictive analytics. I think it will be one day, but I don't think it's ready yet for a lot of people. Now, another challenge is how do you even explain it when the machine comes back and makes a prediction? This it's a funny slide from my data science team. I've got a predictive team in the company, and one of my data scientists built a model for one of our customers to say we're going to predict churn, and we came up with this very elaborate model on how to predict churn, right? And he presented this slide, super smart guy, presented the slide to the client, and said, here, this is the proof of why this model works. As you can see, it's obvious, right? Does everyone see why it's so obvious? And the client, of course, is looking at this slide, and my data science guy, statistics guy, says this is an area on the under the curve prediction, and you can see how accurate it is. And the client's thinking, okay, what percentage of time is this right? I don't even understand what you're talking about, right? And so I think one of the other problems in predictive analytics in customer success is the fact that people don't even understand how to interpret it yet. And frankly, when a machine is wrong, we stop trusting the machine. And this is an interesting problem, right? We want to trust our intuition more than the machine. And our data science people want us to just trust them, right? They want us to just have faith in the machine, but I don't think that's ready yet. So this is something where you might think, I'm all in on predictive analytics and machine learning. I think the customer success is much more than that, just one piece of the puzzle. Okay, pitfall number 4 is once you've figured out where your risk is, you've looked at the data holistically, you've done some analysis, some analytics, one of the biggest challenges is just because you know there's a problem doesn't mean you can fix it. And this is the concept of lift. Lift means, can I actually impact this? I know this customer is likely to churn for some reason. Can I actually impact it? And so when you think of customer success, one of the things I really advise people to do is don't just look at every potential problem and apply equal effort to it. Try to build something like this 2x2 grid, right? The left side, the kind of rows, are correlation to churn. What are signals that indicate that a customer is likely to churn? The columns are my ability to do something about it. So as an example, a customer at the end of the contract that's not using my product or service, it's actually very, very likely they're probably going to churn, and there's very likely I can't do anything about it, right? And so a lot of companies devote inordinate amounts of time to that end of cycle save, when in fact they could be going to the early part of the cycle, the people that went through onboarding and there was a sponsor change, so things stopped and you never reestablished a relationship. And it's you should reapply resource where you have an impact. So if you're running a customer success or adoption initiative, don't spread it like peanut butter. Focus on where you can have an impact. Really, really important. I see a lot of people that are just pushing on a string, where they're working on the stuff where they can't really do anything about it. They know it's going to churn, write it off, go focus on the stuff you can really make an impact on. So this idea of lift, where can I have an impact in my business? Number 5, so this concept is that customer success, like all processes, a lot like renewals, is not something that you can just throw out there and hope the team implements it. And I would say that that's something that a lot of us in business, we'd love to be totally hands-off managers. We'd love to be able to say, hey, here's some best practices, here's some tools, here's a Simon Sinek talk, right? Go at it and go work. I would say customer success is actually a lot about process and discipline for a lot of companies. It's actually, the reality is a lot of people naturally want to use their gut instinct. They want to just, you go outside and some people say, oh, it feels like rain right now, right? Feels like it's going to rain. And they want to be like, it feels like this customer's totally happy and they're not going to churn, right? And they want to use their gut instinct. I'm not saying the gut instinct's wrong, but the job of the manager, the job of all of you is to reinforce with process, And one of the biggest mistakes I see is people don't have the courage to implement process. They don't have the courage to make a bet and say, this is how we're going to do things. We're going to put effort into onboarding. We're not going to focus on this. You know what? Not all your team's going to agree either. So you have to decide, are you optimizing for results? Or are you trying to win a popularity contest, right? And I think, obviously, it's a little bit easier said than done because you want your team to feel great. But I think that I see a lot of people who throw out a customer success initiative and hope it just works itself out. It really requires active management. It requires active management also the further you go down that pyramid. With your high touch folks, they're managing $1 million accounts. The reality is you can't micromanage them. If you do, that'll backfire, right? But for the mid-size accounts, the small accounts, you've got to give a lot of direction. And I think the people that try to implement customer success but don't have the same discipline that they've got in inside sales or in renewals, they end up failing, right? Now, different, like I said, with the high touch. In high touch, it's the opposite. If you try to put too many procedures and kind of directives in front of these large account managers, that'll fail too. So be very thoughtful about how you implement process. And it's something I think ServiceSource does really well, and a lot of folks in the room do well. So hopefully that's come second nature to you. And we think about that as the idea of basically giving a to-do list. This is our product, so obviously self-serving commercial, but the idea that you want to eventually give somebody a recipe for what they're supposed to do. They really need to understand what do they do with their day. Because customer success, one of the challenges is you don't know where to focus, right? There's just too much to focus on. And this is like an example of how you might give somebody some focus. Number 6, okay, so now that you've got a customer success project in motion, maybe it's a pilot, maybe you've got it going, how do you actually measure results? So this is a big thing people wrestle with as well, because it's a little different from renewals, right? Renewals, theoretically, you're getting data all the time. Even though it doesn't happen overnight, you're really close to the transaction. I was talking to a company recently that it's a big software company, and they implemented a customer success pilot, and 60 days in, the CEO said, how come our renewal rate hasn't gone up yet? And the company has multi-year contracts. So I don't know who was brave enough to tell the CEO the logical fallacy of that, right? But the reality is they didn't set it up right. They didn't think about what should we be measuring in this process. And if you don't do that, people are going to get very impatient. And by the way, I don't know about you, if you worked in business long enough, the last in, first out. So the last new initiative to be started when things get tough is the first one to get canceled, right? And so I've seen some companies start customer success initiatives, get impatient, not sure about the results, and then cancel them. And then obviously it's a lot of wasted effort. So really think about how you're going to measure it. What we like to talk about is the idea that the customer success team, like a renewals team, is going to do things. They're going to have activities. And those activities are going to lead to early indicators. And that's really where the magic comes in, is getting agreement on the early leading indicators. What are the leading indicators from this project? Because I'm not going to be able to improve your renewal rate in 90 days, right? But I'm going to be able to increase our time to get to high adoption, our percentage adoption, our NPS. I can change that stuff, right, if I'm the leader of a customer success team. So what are the things I'm setting myself up for? What are the expectations I'm setting? And then, yeah, believe me, they're going to have results down the road, right? We're not doing this just out of the goodness of our heart, but that's going to take time. So really make sure your management knows what the expectation is near term. And we like the idea of trying to bubble it up into some kind of scorecard to say this is how we're measuring success for this customer success initiative. Now, idea number 7 kind of goes back to the Simon Sinek. He talked about millennials yesterday and the idea of everyone getting a trophy, everyone getting a rhythm. And there's a version of this for customer success. I'll tell you a story recently. I was talking to a large company, and I was talking to somebody who said, I'm creating a team. They're responsible, the person said, they're responsible for proactively making sure our clients are getting value. They're adopting our service. They're not comped on renewals or retention. And the goal is to actually make sure down the road that the clients renew. But that's what our team, it's a brand new team. And their title was something like strategic accounts. And I was like, oh, it's funny. Have you ever thought about calling it customer success? And they said, I wanted to call it customer success, but somebody else took that title internally already. And that's something that we see a lot, is companies basically are taking all of their teams and rebadging them all customer success teams. I don't know if this happened to your company, right? And so everyone says, and it obviously increases your rate of external recruiters contacting you, gives you a raise, right? There are good reasons to do it. But there's a lot of confusion that comes out of this. If everything is customer success, then nothing is customer success, right? And I think that's a big problem. The bigger your company, the bigger the problem this is, right? We actually say, like, as you get to really big companies, you really got to think about what's that like center of excellence model. Somebody, not necessarily somebody to own all of the customer success motion, but to define the standards, right? What is customer success? Is it a role? Is it a system? Is it a process? What are the different modes that we deliver it in? What's our pyramid and our touch model? And then when we acquire a new company and they have a CSM team, maybe we let them run standalone, but we incorporate them into our model, right? You know, how do we decide what goes into the central group versus the independent groups? Don't let this just happen through 1,000 flowers blooming, you know, all throughout the company, because it's going to backfire on you. One way it'll backfire is the customer is going to get a disjoint experience. They're going to have customer success from one business unit versus another. They're going to get confused and they're going to get cynical. So how do you get customers to understand what the desired customer experience is and then align on that internally? So that's that seventh idea. Don't just let everyone do their own thing in terms of customer success. So I know I'm preaching a lot of control and process, and I believe me, creativity, autonomy, those things matter as well. But customer success is really hot right now, and if you don't kind of get a handle on it, then it's going to go out of control, and I think that'll backfire for people. So in summary, the 7 deadly sins of customer success. So number 1, don't adopt a one-size-fits-all model across all your segments. Number 2, don't wait for perfect data. Leverage the data you have. Number 3, don't assume that the machine learning predictive analytics is the whole answer. 4, focus not just on what you can predict, but what you can impact. Number 5, focus on the process, not just the data. Make sure you can take action on it. Number 6, make sure you have goals that you're realistic to measure how this goes. And then number 7, make sure that you've got some standards across your company for how you approach it. So this is kind of some advice, and honestly, every one of these, I can think of really big companies that stumbled into these, and maybe some of you have been through these as well. So hopefully it saves you a little bit of trouble as you go on this journey to customer success. I'll close out with just something kind of reflecting from the Simon Sinek talk. So, you know, Simon, I think, talked a lot about any change and all the emotions that come with it, and I think customer success is going to create a lot of emotions. You know, taking away functions from other teams, increases in spending. I know some big companies that are funding customer success by cutting spending elsewhere, right? So this is like emotional stuff. So this journey to customer success is going to take all of the things Simon talked about. It's going to take the endorphins, right? That thrill that we have, that I think we are making an impact, the thrill with the customer. It's going to take the dopamine. There has to be real results here, like I talked about, right? It's going to take the serotonin, because it's even more collaborative than any other job. Like, I think customer success forces us to think more like a team. And then it's going to take oxytocin, which I learned yesterday is different than oxycodone, by the way. So the oxytocin, which is, you know, the reality that this job becomes very hard, right? Customer success is actually quite a hard job, a lot like renewals, because sometimes it can be measured by the negative, not the positive. But when in doubt, you're in California, so there's lots of other medicinal sources to get you through this journey to customer success, and more approved on the ballot last week. So that's all for me. Thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate it. Thank you.